In ArchiCAD we have three ways of looking at the virtual building or the 3D model. The differences to a new user is not always clear. As most of the tools in ArchiCAD are designed to create a virtual building in 3D, the three environments are necessary to deliver an advanced design tool and documentation tool. The three environments are as follows. Firstly, we have the symbolic view. The symbolic view, 3D that looks like 2D, but we can still edit or change the model as if we were in 3D, because we actually are. In other words, if I picked up one of these walls and moved it, every other window that would be sitting in would update. So if I push the 3D window, we would see that that wall is now on an angle. So if I push Control Z or Apple Z, it comes back, and if I go to F3, once again the 3D window is updated. This environment is really used to highlight the documentation aspect of the model, symbolic walls, roofs, windows, text and dimensions, etc. that help us deliver the paper plans that we deliver to site. The 3D view, so if I push F4 on a Mac and F5 on a PC, opens up the second environment. This is a perspective or axonometric view of the model. This is where we can actually view our model and analyze your design and change it as well. And because you're still in 3D, all the changes of course will be reflected through your model. The third environment is the photo render view. So if I click on the photo render view here, this third environment, here we basically take pictures of our 3D model using a sort of or type of virtual camera. So the result cannot be manipulated after it's completed. They're basically pictures. I can click here and nothing will happen. So these pictures are pure pixels. Each of these three categories can be viewed in a number of different ways. So I've just closed the photo render window. Now I'm in the regular 3D window where we can move around our model, and then the floor plan 3D area. In the symbolic view or the 2D view of the model, we can change the way it looks by selecting each object and opening the object and changing the cover fills and changing the colors here. So if I don't want cover fills, I just push OK. Now the cover fill's not showing. So the surface or cover fill is element specific as it's shown. Once doing that, if I go to the 3D window, you'll notice that nothing has changed there, because that change has only affected this particular window. So the three categories we're talking about are very much independent. So now if I open an elevation, for example, we can see that we have colors and vectorial hatching. This is another way that we can look at the model. If I go to the settings, section elevation settings, I can turn the color off in this section. I can turn off uniform color. I can turn off the vectorial hatching. Actually, I'll leave the vectorial hatching on, push OK, and we'll see that the colors will now disappear. Of course, I can change the look of this one more time by going to the section elevation settings, and this time I'm going to turn off the vectorial hatching as well. So now if I rebuild the model, we'll see that we have a bare basic view of the 3D information. The next environment we go to is the 3D environment. So by pushing F4 on a Mac and F5 on a PC, up comes our model, and over here we can see that we are in the internal engine. This will also look different if I change various parameters within the internal engine, like turning the vectorial hatching off and transparency and shading. I don't have any windows here, so that'll have no effect, and I'll just leave the vectorial sun shadows on, which at the moment the sun's at the front, so it's casting the shadow out towards the back. You can just sort of see it there. So that's with the vectorial hatching off. Now if I change this once again to the OpenGL rendering engine, the same materials will look very different because of the different type of engine that is rendering our model. In all of these views, we can navigate around our model very easily. So we can change or insert things at any stage. Next we're going to have a look at how these four walls are slightly different material-wise and the effect that that has on the way they're represented in our second environment, which is our editable 3D environment. So if I collapse that for a second and go to Options, Material, the only two rendering engines I'm going to talk about in this particular area is the internal engine and the OpenGL engine. The Lightworks rendering engine we will deal with in the third environment, which is the photo render environment. So first of all, if I go to the internal engine, we can see that we've got no vectorial hatch and no texture. However, if I go to the OpenGL engine, we see no texture and it doesn't display vectorial, so that variable's not there. Next, if I go to Fieldstone 2, we can see once again no texture in the OpenGL, and in the internal engine we now have Fieldstone. We now have a Fieldstone hatch. So if I push OK, I'm going to change this window by turning the vectorial hatching on. Just another way of looking at the model. So there's my hatching. So back to the materials, we can see Fieldstone 2 has the Fieldstone hatching, that's that one there, but in the OpenGL it still has no hatching because it can't display it. Next, if I go to Fieldstone 3, we have a texture, and of course we have no vectorial hatch. Fieldstone 4, we have, in the internal engine, we have a vectorial hatch and a texture. In that sense, Fieldstone 3 is identical to Fieldstone 4. The difference comes in the Lightworks rendering engine, which we'll talk about a bit later. So they're basically your three options and a different way they're viewed. So remembering that the only difference between the top window and the bottom window is the engine that they were rendered with. In both windows we can navigate and move around our file, change things, add things, but if I photo render this, we can see if I go to the photo render settings and change it to the Lightworks rendering engine, push OK. Now if I render it now, we can see that it's reflected those changes in those different materials. So if I just wait for this to render, so if I go to Options, Materials, we'll see that the only difference between 3 is in the Lightworks rendering engine we have no texture map, which is taken from the internal engine. So in Fieldstone 3 on the internal engine we have a texture, but not on the Lightworks rendering engine, which is why this is just plain and this has a texture associated with it. So if I go to Fieldstone 4, we see that in the Lightworks rendering engine we also have a texture, and if I go to the internal engine we have the texture there as well, and this explains why this has come up like it has here. And remember, this is just like a photo, we can't touch or move anything in this window. So that's the third environment. So hopefully this explains the three different 3D environments: the photo render, the internal rendering engines, and of course the 2D environment, which is still 3D. Hopefully this has explained the way all the materials interact with each of those environments.